This presentation will explore Rachel, a 24-year-old Aboriginal female. It will provide information about food consumption patterns in Australia and how food culture is changing. Rachel resides in Thomastown, Victoria, in Australia, which is shown right here in this map. There are a number of historical influences that have impacted on current food practices within Australia. These are listed below. These events have resulted in long-term and unintended consequences of changes in human food acquisition, production, technology, trade, and food preferences. Listed below are some of the common staple foods found in Australia. Here we can see a variety of condiments, herbs and spices that are now a common addition to Australian dishes. Some of the key food preparation and cooking methods in Australia are listed below. Here we can look at the different regional variations of where food is grown in Australia. In Australia, there are a number of different religions that have core beliefs that affect their food consumption. There are also a number of occasions in Australia where food is involved to help with celebration. Unlike other societies, Australia have inherited no cuisine in the traditional sense. Australia's food history has instead been dynamic, urban, industrial, science-based and capitalist-driven. Many years ago, when the Indigenous populated Australia, food was sourced by foot covering large distances, and the bulk of the diet was made up of the below sources. There was no formal agriculture. However, plants were carefully conserved by removing only the edible portions. The seeds were then planted around campsites and became convenient sources of future harvests. Emus, kangaroos, and crocodiles were hunted using spears, boomerangs, and nets. Farming in Australia today is at the forefront of the country's development. Farmers today use a range of technologies to continuously adapt and improve their farming practices. There are a variety of machinery used to cover more land with less labour. There's modern transport, cooling facilities, genetically produced plants, animal feeds, and breeding of animals that are resistant to diseases, and irrigation of plants. Here we will look at food consumption over time in Australia. Since the 1940s, there has been a decline in beef products due to substituting beef for poultry, pork, and lamb. Seafood production has more than doubled since 1938, and the consumption of dairy products has gradually increased, due almost entirely to an increase in cheese consumption. Grain products have increased over the years, in particular rice. This could be due to Australians adopting and consuming Asian cuisines. Sugar consumption has also risen. This is mainly due to the introduction of snack foods, such as confectionery. In the gold rush period in Australia, thousands of Chinese entered the country, and many remained afterwards. They had a great impact on eating habits of colonies, and many found work as chefs on rural properties and also in hotels. The Chinese used their knowledge of irrigation to grow vegetables that others had not been able to. The knowledge and entrepreneurship of the Chinese brought great diversity to the Australian diet. By the 1950s, most suburbs had at least one Chinese restaurant, and recipes for Chinese meals started to appear in magazines and cookbooks. When it came to fine dining, Australia looked to the French. Formal occasion menus were often written in French, and the finest restaurants were run by French chefs. Curries became popular in Australia by the middle of the 19th century, due to long-term trade with India, and also due to the British embracing commercial curry powders. In the 1960s, supermarkets began to appear in Australia, offering lower food prices. Today, supermarkets have become so massive, stocking up to 30,000 different products. In the 1990s, Woolworths established the Fresh Food Initiative, which brought a much larger selection of fruit and vegetables into the supermarket in a brightly lit display. This greatly increased the consumption of fresh food, as they now account for 40% of sales in Woolworths today. Modern marketing, such as advertising, has had a strong influence on food choice and consumption. Advertising is so persuasive and appears everywhere, from shop fronts, billboards, television, magazines, and many more media outlets. Thank you for viewing this presentation, and I hope you now have a better understanding of food consumption patterns in Australia.